Yeah, brilliant. So thanks everybody for joining us this morning. Chloe from My G Works is going to be delivering the training this morning. Obviously, a few of you will have seen Chloe before, if you've been to any of the other previous training sessions. So this is a second one of Allyship in the workplace. We had another one a couple of weeks back, but this is the sort of repeat session of that one. So thank you everybody for joining us, particularly those in Asia. It's nice to have you all on the call with us this morning. I'll hand you over to Chloe.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Fran. Well, my name is Chloe Davies, but I'm from My G Work. My G Work's the online business community for LGBT students, graduates, business professionals, and all those who believe in true workplace equality. And so we are an inclusion partner with Sheffield Haworth. And like Fran said, this is the second Allyship in the workplace, but we also had Rethinking Diversity Management last week with KK Harris. And that video will be available shortly that we'll be able to share with you. But for now, we're going to go into this morning's session. Just to start off, this is an interactive training session where we will go through a light touch introduction to the LGBT community, what it means to be an LGBT plus ally, and then finally ending on some tips to being an effective ally. It is a safe space, so please do ask any questions if you feel like there's something that you've always wanted to ask. Let's just be mindful that we should be respectful. I should also explain that we're going to cover evolution and devolution of language in some aspects of identities within the community. So hopefully that will be explained as we come through to those points. Now, allyship, the very first time that we show allyship is not particularly to any part of the community, but we do it in so many different aspects. Recently, we recognised Remembrance Day and recognising our war heroes in days gone by. For 101 years, we have recognised women's right to vote and stood in solidarity alongside other women, that they have the voice and the power to be present, not only in voting, but in senior leadership, in business, and in so many other aspects. If, like myself, as I said at the beginning, I've got two boys. Miles is 4, Theo is 3, and hopefully, fingers crossed, will stay asleep throughout this whole session. We've come together to look and recognise parents for flexible working. When the whole world, suddenly went onto a flexible working contract during COVID-19, that for parents was like the absolute wonder, because we've been fighting for it for so long. We've stood in solidarity and in allyship with each other for our mental health and our well-being. We would say that before the pandemic seriously hit in, 1 in 4 people would suffer at some point during their lives with a mental health issue. We now say that's probably about 1 in 2. And so when we look at, there are amazing organisations like MHFA, but also a lot more businesses are looking at their wellbeing policies. How do they support each other in business? And so we come together in allyship, but also just checking in on each other and saying, how can we come together for mental health? But in particular for the LGBTQ plus community, up here in the top left-hand corner, this is the Stonewall Inn 51 years ago. And the name that you most often would recognise within our community is Marsha P. Johnson. But when we think about the origins of our movement and how it started, some names that you might not necessarily have heard before are Sylvia Rivera and Stormy Delavere. Our movement was started by Black and brown sex workers, trans people within the community who said, we've had enough. And so while Marsha says that she didn't actually throw the first brick, we're not really sure who did, but this is how it started, the Stonewall riots 51 years ago. And so obviously this is how we celebrate and recognise ourselves today. But to be honest, as we've all seen throughout the last 6 or 7 months, and especially during the summer, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement again in abundance, starting with, unfortunately, the murder of George Floyd, but it brought together people not only to come and protest and march, but allies from all across the world in solidarity for the Black community, which cannot not include Black LGBTQ plus people. So in particular, you would have seen the Black Trans Lives Matter March, where we've seen the disproportionate amount of violence that Black trans people face around the world. And that's the top left-hand corner, Black Lives Matter marches around the world. That top right is John Boyega. John, who said said, I just wanted to march. I just wanted to be out on the streets. I felt like it was important to lend my voice in that capacity. And someone recognised him at Hyde Park, and so that impassioned speech that he gave, that he said, I didn't go there to give a speech. I don't remember what I said, to be honest, but it was that moment, and it was real and it was raw. And then lastly, the bottom right hand corner there, this is outside the Brooklyn Museum in Brooklyn, and this was the peaceful trans rally where everyone came together and showed solidarity for the Black trans community, and everyone saw white. So I think they said that there were almost 10,000 people there in that picture. Now, what does it mean to be an ally? Well, although support and education of LGBTQ+, and that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer people, has progressed significantly in recent years, the community still faces discrimination in the workplace, barriers to healthcare and social housing, harmful bias, and there has been, and you can see the 2 stars that says increase. This is in reported hate crimes, and this is why allies are so very important. Now, an ally is someone who supports equal civil rights, gender equality, LGBTQ+ social movements, and is someone who challenges homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, discrimination and racism, both publicly and privately. Now, anyone can be an ally, whether you are heterosexual, cisgender. Now, cisgender, I was born a woman, I define myself as a woman, therefore I am classed as cisgender, or a member of the LGBTQ+ community yourself. You are someone who supports the unique needs and struggles of the people within it. Now, key qualities of being an ally are someone who has a desire to learn and understand, to help people feel seen and supported and feel included, and is someone who wishes to address barriers to fairness and justice for everyone. Now, why are workplace allies so needed? Well, to empower ourselves, we must first empower others, I should say. We must first empower ourselves to be brave in our interactions, conversations. And this bravery in turn translates into a stepping stone for more inclusive and collaborative environments. Now, our language is intrinsic to our expression of culture, not only as a means of communicating our values, beliefs, and customs, but it has an important social function and allows us to foster feelings of group identity and solidarity. It's the means by which our cultures and traditions and values may be conveyed and preserved. But it is also a power concept because it has the ability to completely shape one's own personal identity, and the way in which we use words and phrases can significantly impact on an individual's thoughts and character. Now, language is an extremely powerful tool that aids in building not only new relationships and experiences, but sustaining existing ones as well. Now, recognizing that there are an infinite number of ways for one to identify and express their sexuality, sex, or gender, I hope this particular part of the session is as inclusive of as many identities as possible. Remember, it's a light touch introduction, so some of you on the call may be more knowledge within the community, others you might be hearing about identities for the very first time, but we're going to explore the LGBT spectrum and expand the plot. Now, this is the genderbread person. I don't know if anyone has seen a genderbread person before. There are very many different versions. I think we're currently on version 2.1. There's even also a unicorn. Now today I'm going to use this one, and it's very binary in the sense that it defines woman and man. But if we start off at the top, and you can see under gender identity, that very small rainbow that covers in the middle, genderqueer, that is supposed to include all the other identities between woman and man, which we know is incredibly vast. And there's a lot of work being done here in the UK by the charity Stonewall, that the next evolution of the genderbread person is more inclusive of identities today. But for now, as a starting place, we're going to start with this one. So gender identity, this is how you think about yourself in your head. It's how the chemistry that composes who you are, and that's how it's defined by you, and then how you choose to interpret that. Gender expression is how you demonstrate that, whether it's in a way that you act, dress, behave, or interact with others. Biological sex, this is how we are born, female or male, or as you can see there in the center, it says intersex. Now, we'll cover this a little bit more later on, but intersex means that you are someone who's born with a combination of the two biological sexes. Lastly, sexual orientation. So this is who you are physically, spiritually, and or emotionally attracted to based on the other person's sex or gender in relation to your own. So here we go with the spectrum. This is the fun part. You have your microphones on, or you can pop this all in the chat. I don't mind whichever way you want to. But this is a spectrum as you don't normally see it. So ordinarily you might see LGBT, you might see LGBT plus, even sometimes you might see LGBTQ plus as well. But we are going to explore the identities that live within it on a day-to-day basis, but don't always get seen underneath the plus. If anyone would like to start me off with what they believe the L stands for. No pressure, but the last group did this very, very well.
I'll go for the L, lesbian.
Thank you, Fran. Anyone like to tell me what they believe the G stands for?
Cái bác sĩ.
Thank you. The B?
Bisexual.
Thank you.
I've got watching a show in the background.
I should say I can't see you all at the moment because I'm showing my screen, so you're safe. Don't worry about being seen. The P. The P.
Pansexual.
Perfect. Thank you. The T.
Transgender.
Transgender. The Q. Well, there's two Qs. I don't mind which order.
Queer, I guess.
Queer is one. Yeah.
No, stumped.
Okay. The other Q, it's yeah, it's in there. Well, other Q is for questioning. That shape didn't actually work. The I, we mentioned it just before with biological sex on the gender.
Intersex.
Intersex, yes. And then those two A's.
Androgynous.
Androgynous is not one, no.
Oh.
I did a search. I did a Google search. Asexual and aromantic.
Google search. Asexual is one, and then the last A is indicative in the title of this session.
Ally.
Ally, perfect. Thank you very much. Oh, Melissa, that's got me tickled. So LGBTQIAA plus, it's a combination of letters meant to represent identities within the LGBT or queer community. These letters represent lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, trans or transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, and ally. The plus sign is to indicate the infinite number of other identities. So starting off with lesbian, well, this is women who are primarily attracted romantically, physically, and or emotionally to other women. Remember, at any time, if you have any questions, please do just chime in or say if you need to. Gay, this is traditionally someone experiencing solely or primarily to some members of the same gender. So it can be used to refer to men who are attracted to other men or women who are attracted to other women. But it is also an umbrella term used to refer to the queer or LGBT community as a whole, or as an individual identity label for anyone who is not straight. So giving some context here about our community around the world, if you are in international spaces, predominantly in the US, more often than not, you will find women who class themselves as gay women. Now, you do find women who class themselves as gay women here in the UK, but more often than not, the higher percentage is that women will class themselves as lesbian. In the US, women will class themselves as gay women. You'll find gay men, but also you might find that there are a lot of people who identify in many of the other ways that you see here on this screen and will just class themselves as gay. So it's an overarching umbrella term. You'll also see this a lot in the entertainment industry in the US as well, that they'll refer to the gay community and not the many other identities within. Now, bisexual, traditionally, this was someone who experiences attraction to some men and women, but as time has gone on and people have been able to, the identity has been able to evolve and people have been able to actually specify what it means themselves, we now say that for someone who is bisexual or bi plus, as it has become an umbrella term, is a person who experiences attraction to more than one gender. Now, bisexual attraction does not have to be equally split. It's not 50-50, or that there's a certain level of interest based across the genders that, you know, you're 20% man and 30% women and 40% trans. It doesn't work like that. But like I said, has become an umbrella term. So if you are Googling Vanessa, you'll find that within the bi spectrum, bisexual umbrella, there are many other identities. So biromantic, again, like I mentioned, bi plus, which is all encompassing, bi fluid. And so the bisexual community, there are many other identities within that as well. Now, I think it was Pansexual Awareness Day a couple of weeks ago. Someone who's pansexual is someone who experiences sexual, romantic, physical and or spiritual attraction for members of all gender identities and expressions. This is often shortened to pan. Now, someone who is trans or transgender, as we mentioned before, this is an umbrella term covering a range of identities that transgress socially defined gender norms. Now, trans with an asterisk is the written form, but it's never spoken. And this is to indicate that you're referring to a larger group nature of the term, which includes non-binary identities, as well as gender non-conforming, trans men, trans women, and many other identities within their spectrum. Now, within lots of different industries, so still in the legal industry and also in medical practice, there's still terminology that is used that the trans community have deemed they find offensive. So you might still see in written form transsexual, but the trans community have said they no longer wish to be referred to in that way. And we know that there's still legal and medical language, but there's lots of work being done for this to be changed to transgender. So just be mindful that that's a devolution in terms. Now, queer, again, this is a term with some sensitivity. In the last group that got picked up, we had a really good conversation between Debbie and a few others, because traditionally queer is a derogatory term. So it is an umbrella term to describe individuals who don't identify as straight and or cisgender, but it is also a slur. And so if we think about this in a certain context, if we look at the LGBT community today, and we look to our younger generation, so 25s and unders, they have reclaimed the term queer. They believe that despite identifying in many different ways as we are going through today, the only way in which they wish to be referred is as queer people. They don't want to be defined by any other label, and so they have reclaimed the term queer. For the middle groups of middle-aged LGBT people, either way, not really involved in the debate. They're quite happy. But for our elder generation who went through a time where it was used to bully, to discriminate, to demean, caused some real pain and some real hardship with the term, people lost jobs and lives. It's a word, a term that they still do not feel comfortable with. And so because of its historical use as a derogatory term and still quite often used in that aspect today, it has not been widely embraced by the wider community. And so you'll see this more often not reflected in our pride movements. So I volunteer for UK Black Pride, and within our community, queer identities have very much been part of our community and openly discussed for a very long time. So we would use the Q, we would say Q2POX, queer, trans, intersex, people of colour. for wider Pride movements, so when we think of like Pride in London, they actually still use LGBT plus or LGBT because of the vast spectrum of stakeholders that they deal with. There is no one overriding conversation that says we want to embrace the Q or not, because we don't want to be offensive to people. So it's not erasing people who identify as queer, it's just being sensitive to the fact that it's still a word that causes a lot of pain. And so it's just to be mindful on that one. Now, questioning this is an individual or someone who over time is still unsure, is exploring their own sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, remember when we talked about intersex on the genderbread person, this is someone who has a combination of chromosomes, gonads, hormones, internal sex organs, and or genitals that differs from the two expected patterns of male or female. So someone who might be male presenting, so my friend Anik, who's part of Interact and Intersex, they're two intersex organisations, one's in the UK, one's in the US. And so Anik outwardly appears as male, but is intersex and internally has the genetic makeup, some genetic makeup of a female or woman. And so when we've had the conversation about someone who's intersex, which we've learned so much more in the last 5 to 10 years, but before that wasn't widely spoken about, we would most often meet someone who's intersex at birth. So originally, if a child is born and a doctor couldn't overwhelmingly tell what the sex or gender is of a child based on their genetic sexual anatomy, they would intervene. This we know as female to male genital mutilation or male to female genital mutilation, and they would correct what they could see. So it might be a child that's outwardly born with both physically presenting sexual organs of a man and a woman, and a doctor would take away the one that they felt was incorrect. And this, unfortunately, is still medical practice today. It hasn't been criminalised as it has been done around the world. It's still, unfortunately, medical practice. There's a lot of work that's being done to not only get this criminalised, for these practices to stop, but also for us to understand so much more about intersex people, intersex bodies. As Anik has said, and many other intersex people have said, it's most often than not until someone who's intersex goes through puberty that we really start to understand. And so sometimes you might find women or girls who don't have a womb or vice versa. So yes, much to learn about someone who's intersex. Now, as someone who's asexual, and again, asexual has become an umbrella term. This is someone experiencing little or no sexual attraction to others and or has a lack of interest in sexual relationships and behaviours. Now, asexuality exists on a continuum from people who experience no sexual attraction or don't have any desire for sex, to those who experience low levels of sexual attraction only under specific conditions. Now, many of these different places on the continuum have their own identity labels, many of which Vanessa supplied us with, but you might find asexual, aromantic, agender, or many others underneath the asexual umbrella. Now, lastly, ally traditionally is someone who is straight and or cisgender, who supports and respects members of the LGBT community. But as I mentioned at the very beginning, we should all be allies to each other. I would hope that I'm an ally to others within the LGBT community, but also heteronormative society as well. It's not an either or. We should be allies to each other. So I hope that explains just some of the identities in the LGBTQ plus spectrum. And again, if you do have any questions, please do just ask. Now, gender pronouns. When someone asks you to use their pronouns, they're asking for you to respect their identity. And when someone refers to another person using the wrong pronouns, especially on purpose, this can lead to that person feeling disrespected, but it can also lead to dysphoria, exclusion, and alienation. Now, when explaining gender pronouns, I like to start off with explaining pronouns and titles first and foremost. So imagine that you are a straight man that's getting married to a straight woman. You spend time and money. Please cast your mind to possibly pre-COVID, where we could gather together in large groups. And on your wife's first day back at work, instead of someone referring to her as Mrs., which is her rightful new title, instead they refer to her as Miss or Ms. It's the same if you're a single woman and you keep being referred to as Mrs. instead of the others, or you spent the last 7 years training to be a doctor and instead you're referred to as everything else but that. All of that can cause an impact. All of that can be quite hurtful. When someone is giving you their gender pronouns, they're asking you to truly see them as they are. And so anything less would be an impact of pain, really hurtful. And so it's why it's so important to recognize people when they are using their gender pronouns, specifically from the LGBT community. But pronouns aren't just an LGBT thing. What do you do if you have a gender neutral name like Joe or Alex and you are constantly being misgendered in the workplace because someone makes the assumption that Joe must be a man's name and Alex, or vice versa? It's really important that if we have the opportunity for someone to present their pronouns, that we actually respond to them accordingly. And so it's how people wish to be seen, and it isn't just LGBT, it's about people. Now, what do I do if I make a mistake? Well, hopefully if you make a mistake, you just apologize. But there are oftentimes people ask, well, when is the right time to use someone's pronouns? And usually I would say, well, have you had a conversation? Have you engaged, in some dialogue first and foremost before you ask someone, what are your pronouns? When we could have physical events, we might have options where you would go to an event and you would have a name badge. Or it may even be that, if you go to things like events at Lush, you can get your pronoun badges and openly share those on your t-shirts as well. But there are also many other different examples of ways in which you can use pronouns. So I use mine on my email footer. Like I said, my title's changed, but I use mine on my email footer because it's also a really great way of creating an inclusive space where I offer out mine, and if someone wishes to offer out theirs, then they can do so. And so, like I said, it's not just for LGBT, although I am LGBT, but it's also about how do you create space for people to be able to show up if they want to. And so, we've had some examples where it's inspired people across businesses when their businesses have chosen to put pronouns voluntarily, so people to voluntarily put their pronouns on their email footers. It has inspired some people to come out in the workplace. It's even inspired some people to actually truly be honest about who they are and start their journeys of transition in the workplace as well. So I would always say that it's an incredibly powerful and impactful thing to do if you so wish to, but across all levels as well, not just from the bottom up, but the top back downwards and all the levels in between. I think that it's really can be really powerful, and you never really know who is looking when you do use your pronouns and do them proudly. So if you do have the capacity, I always say that it's something that's really positive and is a positive way of making your business more inclusive. So when we are thinking about some tips on being an effective ally, thank you all for listening and for being open-minded, for being willing to talk, although a little jogging, but I do appreciate it. Be mindful of using gendered greetings such as hello guys or hello ladies. I actually really thought about this a couple of years ago. I was at a conference and a trans woman, Natalie, she said, I would really appreciate it if you would just use something a bit more gender neutral, like hey folks or hi everyone, because every time you say hello guys or hello ladies, actually I find it I find it quite triggering because it's reminding me of my past life. And I didn't actually think about, when we refer to what has very much become slang, hello guys, we've got it off television and it has become part of our English language. And so just to be mindful that when we are using gender, when we are greeting people, I can talk properly, that we use gender neutral greetings, and additionally, as we just covered, use the preferred pronouns and names appropriately if they are presented. Now, educate yourself not just on LGBTQ plus issues, but educate yourself on current events and issues where you realise that this might be an opportunity, that things are rough at times or harder, and it's to show extra compassion and empathy to each other. In particular, like I mentioned, some of the aspects that have gone on throughout this, the last 6 or 7 months when we think about Black Lives Matter, but when we also think about, mental health, LGBTQ plus people, when we think about, especially, in the last couple of days, also what does that mean if, you're based like myself in London and Hertfordshire, so now in tier 3, and so how do we show extra compassion to people at a time which is more difficult? And so just being aware of what's going on in real time actually allows us to be able to do that, but also to be able to do that for ourselves. Now, speak up when you hear something unacceptable. You have the strength and ability to call out individuals who make jokes or slights or have indecent conversations that negatively impact our LGBTQ plus colleagues, but also our colleagues in general. And speaking out and speaking up doesn't always have to mean very loud. You can call it in as well. So, like we just mentioned on this session, there's particular terminology that has devolved or terminology that has evolved, and you might hear someone say something. You can just take someone to one side and call it in and say, I know you might not have realized actually I was on this training session and this word is no longer used for such and such, I just wanted to let you know. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have to massively stick your head above the parapet, but what I would always say to anyone who's choosing to speak up or speak out is please just be mindful and that it comes at no additional cost to yourself. So for many different businesses and yours, I would hope in between that there are certain practices or systems, that there are certain reporting lines. You maybe might refer something to your line manager, or HR department, or DNI. There might even be in some aspects whistleblowing or a confidential line. So please make sure that you use those first before putting yourself at risk if you're in a situation where you find that you need to speak up about some unacceptable behaviour. Now, this is a part I always love to look at everyone's faces, because whenever you mention anything about bias, it always gets everyone's back up. But it's the truth. We all have implicit biases, every single one of us, myself included, and we must learn about them and acknowledge them. Now, whether due to nature or nurture, we all have implicit and subconscious biases that we carry around. However, it's our awareness of this that allows us to make sure that those are in check, that we're not acting on them, and that we're not carrying out any untoward behaviours. Now, in particular, our biases sometimes are fueled by where we seek our knowledge, where we seek our information. So the example that I always like to give in particular is here in the UK with Piers Morgan and Good Morning Britain, someone who has very, very opinionated and allowed his opinions to sometimes impact in the way that he reports the daily news, but also for that to feed through. And unfortunately, that informs other people who would listen to his opinion rather than sometimes listen to the facts. And in particular, we have seen him do this, in talking about race. We've seen him doing this and talking about trans community. In particular, we've seen him do this talking about, the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. And so sometimes very coloured by his opinion. And that opinion then in terms will inform other people if this is the only source of knowledge seeking that people go to. So it's about how we actually get our knowledge from other places, other sources, not just relying on the BBC or not just relying on ITV News to be the only place that you get your information, as sometimes the way in which that reported will inform and amplify a bias that unfortunately didn't need to be there in the first place. Now, lastly, it's not also about defending your LGBTQ plus friends, but it's about defending your friends against discrimination if you see them being treated unfairly in the workplace. And it's believing that all people, regardless of gender identity and sexual orientation, should be treated with dignity and respect. Now, when we're thinking about how to be a better ally, for me, as I said, earlier this summer, when the height of Black Lives Matter movement was really daily occurrence. I had to write how to be a better ally to me, as we were being asked by so many different clients, but also people within the community. But this in turn actually can be used in any aspect. I don't think that it's just in particular to Black people or Black lives. And so when I was thinking about where do you, just like Vanessa, where do you go and seek your knowledge? Google is your friend, but also there are so many other resources that can be used. So I, in particular, when it comes to social media, prefer Instagram. I think that it's a better place, a better source for knowledge for any way in which you wish to learn. So normally I have my background that's the library because I love to read, but if you're not someone who is a bookworm and actually prefers to learn via graphics or via sound, I think Instagram is a welcome place that has every different aspect of learning, whether it's infographics or it's lists of books, and all you'd have to do is follow the hashtag. So follow BLM or Black Lives Matter, follow LGBT, bisexual, intersex. There's so much information underneath all of these hashtags, and so I think it's a great wealth of resource to go and learn more about parts of the community that you might not necessarily be part of or have lived experience with. If you have the capacity to donate your wealth, then that's fantastic. But for me, I think donating your time is one of the most worthwhile things that anyone can do. So I really do appreciate that you've all given up either your mornings or part of your evenings to be here on this session today to kind of learn a bit more. If you have the capacity to volunteer for other organisations now, I don't know whether you have volunteer days within the business, but there are so many worthwhile organisations out there who really would appreciate people of varying skills and skill sets to donate their time to their worthwhile causes. So absolutely, if you have the capacity to be able to do that, I'd also encourage, like it says, to follow voices in parts of the community that you might not have access to or be a part of, just to learn more. I've learned so much more from just listening to people that I never really knew before. I met Anik, like I said, 3 years ago, and I've learned so much more about the intersex community, despite not being someone who's intersex, and it's really enriched my life. So absolutely, if you have the capacity to do that. Please remember that people in general, and in particular when we think about more marginalised groups within our society, are emotionally, mentally and physically exhausted right now. And so especially when we're sharing information, I think a couple of days ago a young man in the US was shot in the back. So it's a place of trigger and trauma. That when we're sharing content and information because we want to raise awareness with people, just be mindful and make sure that you either put a CW, which it covers cautionary warning, or a TW for trigger warning, or even sometimes it's the yellow triangle with a black dot, which also covers trigger warning, just so that people can actually make the choice themselves whether they want to engage in that content or not before they accidentally press it themselves, and then obviously that causes trigger and trauma. Be mindful about when you're tagging people in posts without their permission. And so I would always say, if someone's verified, then absolutely, that's the part and parcel of that they are a public figure. But just be mindful if you're tagging other people that you've sought their permission first. When we're thinking about, like I said, everyone has been on a journey and a place of learning for the last 6 or 7 months in particular about aspects of society that maybe they're a part of, and so it's helping to raise awareness, or others didn't really understand or have a capacity and knowledge to know that this is all work. It's all work that everybody is doing at varying levels. And so, sometimes it's not about actually saying, well, I'm on the path, I'm doing the work. It's actually just to keep doing the work. And so, please be mindful in kind of sharing with people. And especially when we're talking, conversations around race, or we're talking conversations around, in particular, like HIV, things that would have a real impact on people, that when you're sharing knowledge or you're doing that work, just be mindful in how you interact with others. So, for example, if someone came and said, Claire, what does it mean to be bisexual, as I identify as bisexual? My first starting place, I hope, would be that someone had been to Google to search first, just to do a basic level of knowledge. And then if they came to ask, I'd absolutely have all the time in the world to have those conversations, but it's just to be mindful with people of where we start. We had a really good conversation in the last session, and Debbie was saying, sometimes it's really hard to, people are scared, people are afraid to actually say that they either don't know or that they are on a journey. And so what would we recommend? And so, like I said, it's not for more marginalized people to have to explain their very lived existence. What I would hope from anyone who's a true ally in any capacity and an ally to anyone is that they would go and do a certain level of research themselves to have a starting base to then be able to engage with different parts of the community regarding whatever it is, the subject matter that they want to go and kind of speak about or learn more about, or they're at the starting journey for. So again, it's just being mindful about how we interact in those spaces and at that time. If you're inviting different people to be parts of different panels or events, please just make sure that we pay them accordingly. For those that are more marginalized, who are giving up their time and sometimes sharing their trauma, that can be quite difficult. So obviously we should make sure that people within reason are compensated for that. But ultimately, like I said, and like I hope this is a safe space for people to ask questions. Most people are really uncomfortable right now. It's uncomfortable to talk about barriers to oppression. It's uncomfortable to talk about race and really difficult things. It's uncomfortable sometimes to utilize our very existence regardless of where we come into society, and everybody is on a learning curve right now. No one person knows everything more than everybody else. Some people are really being confronted with things, and when we talk about bias and privilege, whilst we all have privilege, it just is at different passing times. That can be really uncomfortable and ruffle our feathers, and everybody, I would say, is in the same boat and in the same aspect. When we are now, like I said, going back into some levels of lockdown, it's not our human nature to be like that. And so this is when we should show these moments to actually offer more empathy to each other, but ultimately, in this uncomfortability, listen to hear, don't listen to respond. Really listen to each other and be able to engage and have conversation in ways that I don't think we've ever been able to before, because the world has slowed down quite a lot. Because regardless of where you come into society, we all need allies, we all need each other, and we all need allyship. So I would hope that this is something that can continue earnestly and not performatively as well. And that is when we get to our Q&A section. So does anyone have any questions? Hi, Vanessa.
No, I have no question.
Oh, no questions. Okay.
No.
I can't see everyone. I think everyone's turned off their cameras. That's why I can only see your camera. Oh, Fran. Oh, I think you're talking, Fran. I think.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Everybody's very quiet this morning. Either
They
that
are
so well that nobody has any questions.
I know, it was like the last time we kept stopping and starting because we had so many questions, and this time I'm like, okay, I'm checking my time, but I've flown through it today. If there is anything that anyone would like to ask offline, or you have any questions, please by all means do contact me. Fran does have my contact details, and I think mine are also there on the screen as well, so you can contact me at any time. But like I said, this is all a learning curve and all a journey, so I really do appreciate that you all have been participating and with us today. And again, the Rethinking Diversity Management session should be available and with you shortly.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chloe.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cole. It was really informative. Thank you.
No worries. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone.
You too.
Take care.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.